listening to the Straight to Video podcast with Rob Lane.
Episode 299 is here. Thank you if you've been a listener from the beginning, or if you're new to my Straight to Video podcast, thank you so much for checking it out. As I mentioned to some people on Facebook recently, after almost regular, unstoppable episodes since I began the show back in 2020, it was kind of starting to feel a little like a limp towards the finish line for the milestone 300, with a few cancellations, unanswered interview requests, and just a bit of a struggle. But as today's chat proves, it's been worth the wait, and a bunch of cool conversations have come to light, and it starts right now as I welcome back Little Angels and Wayward Sons frontman, singer and songwriter Toby Jepson to the show. Now, I really wanted to get Toby back on the podcast. It's been almost 4 years since we spoke. That really was one of my favourite conversations when the show first began. We only scratched the surface in that first interview, and it was super cool to reconnect and really dive into his love of film, both as a fan and working in the movie industry. So I really hope you learned something new about one of this country's finest and without doubt hardest working and intelligent performers. It's a really upbeat talk, and Toby without doubt still has that fire, energy and passion which he's always had, which I find pretty darn inspiring. Now, as always, this Straight to Video podcast is proudly presented to you in association with Affinity Photo, an incredible piece of photo editing software which I've been using for graphic design the past couple of years. Affinity Photo is used to create the podcast episode artwork you see each week, and it's an extremely affordable alternative to other programs on the market. They've been a great supporter of this show, so please check them out at affinity.serif.com. Alright, let's get into this week's chat. Toby always has some cool project underway, and right now is no exception, what with the new Little Angels Rarities album out now, along with some upcoming dates with his band Wayward Sons. So please keep up to date over at tobyjepsonofficial.com, and be sure to follow him on social media as we talk about some of his walk and talks which he does, which are a real eye-opener into his career and thoughts on the modern music industry. But for now, please enjoy episode 299 of the Straight to Video podcast and my chat with Toby Jepson.
Hi there.
Doing it. How are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, lovely to see you.
Yeah, sorry about the last couple of days. It's just been flat out. It's been one of them, you know.
Never worry about stuff like that. Don't stress. It's all good. Last time you was on, it'll be 4 years in October.
Oh, wow.
Time is going way too fast.
Exactly. Way too fast. Exactly.
The hair's gone and everything since then.
Well, it's coming back slightly. I go through periods of it. I looked at myself in the mirror a couple of years ago and I just thought, you silly old fart, what are you looking like that for, you know? Because, you know, I've had long hair all of my life. So I cut it off and we went away, did a big sort of travel odyssey, me and my wife. And whilst I was out there, it was so hot everywhere we went, I thought I'm going to have to... So I took it right back to the bone. But I didn't like that, so I'm trying to grow it back a little bit. I'm hoping I can grow it back, put it that way.
I think you hit a certain age and it's fine. Like, I still want a rocking haircut. Got to be kind of age appropriate as well.
There's a bit of that, without a doubt.
Fine t-shirt, by the way. Is that a Last Exit to Nowhere t-shirt?
It is. I've got several of these. I've had them years. These get a little bit raggedy now.
I'm like, I'm not going to buy any more than they just coming out with these designs. And I'm like, I think this is one, actually. They did like some video shop ones.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. So we're repping for them at the moment. So, you are obviously one of the most busiest people I do see online, certainly from the point of view where you confidently juggle numerous projects, which I find it really inspiring. I think right now you're in the middle, you mentioned you're doing a solo record, but I think you're also in the middle of a big mail out with the Little Angels Rarities CDs. Is that something you enjoy, or is that like a necessity of being an independent musician?
Well, I think it's something I've become. We've all had our difficulties with the last few years for all the obvious reasons, but out of stress and strain and anxiety, often the wellspring of inspiration comes, doesn't it? You know, so I think through the lockdown periods, it was a moment of clarity for me. It's like, well, what do I have? You know, how can I survive? How can I keep going? Because contrary to popular belief, you know, most musicians, it's a bit feast or famine. You know, I'm not a rich man. Most people I know that work in the music industry aren't. You know, the top 1% of people that earn the big bucks and that sell lots of records and tour huge stadiums, they're in the minority. You know, the rest of us are working Joes, really. You know, and I've been a musician or an artistic person all of my life, and that has its challenges. But the whole thing about being challenged in the art world is that you have have to find different routes. You have to find ways of maximizing what you have. And, without sounding daft about it, it's never been about the money for me anyway. It really hasn't. And I'm sick to death and bored of hearing people talk endlessly about what they've got and what money they earn and all the rest of it. It's boring and tedious. And it seems to be a modern disease that people talk about the money they're earning before what they're actually doing first. And it frustrates me a lot, so I'm not driven by the need to earn lots of brass. I'm driven by wanting to create something I feel proud of. And so I think in the lockdown, that forced me to sort of look at myself, look at my history, look at where I wanted to go, look at what was available to me. Given the fact I was in my 50s, my early 50s at this point, what have I achieved in my life as a person? What really matters to me and how I then make that stuff better? And so I think the online stuff, I work with Rob Town, who's a brilliant PR guy, and he runs my business, essentially, my online business, and we work together on it. He's instrumental in the success of what we've managed to achieve. What I love about it, Rob, is I'm completely in control of it. There's no record label. There's no managers. There's no anyone apart from myself and the people I want to surround myself with, largely who are creative people. And so I've built myself to that point where I have an audience. It's not enormous, but it's substantial enough for them to appreciate what I'm doing, for me to appreciate them being there, and for me to work hard to deliver as higher quality stuff as I possibly can. And that's my goal, is to just keep pushing, keep challenging myself and keep doing, I hope, quality work.
Definitely. I say you constantly the word I was going to use was feeding the fan base, but that sounds a bit terrible.
Well, I know what you mean, though.
You're giving something back to them all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
They feel part of it.
Without a doubt. And the trick is to maintain it without looking like you're rinsing everyone all the time. We never put anything out unless we've got something of real value. And I think that's value for the fans in terms of what it might represent from history, but also how we then go forward. I don't want to be stuck in that trench of nostalgia constantly. I don't feel particularly nostalgic about my past. I feel pleased with it and I feel very happy I've done it, but I've always been a proactive, forward-moving person. I'll still be thinking of a new idea when I'm on my deathbed, I'm sure. I'm not interested in just sitting on your laurels. Now, of course, people would view that as well, you're always putting out Little Angel stuff. But of course, I'm very proud of that. What I try and do is reinvent it. You mentioned the Rarity CD. There's nothing on that that's recorded by the Little Angels, because I wrote all the songs pretty much predominantly. So it's me reinterpreting those songs acoustically or with one of my previous solo bands. I found some old versions that we'd recorded at Rock City. So I've got those remixed and blah, blah, blah. So there's always a new reason to do it, because I know that a lot of the fans out there are completists. They want everything. And so it's about giving that, but not taking too much. And also, me and Rob, we are constantly looking for ways of giving stuff for free to people.
What's that? They call that the jab, jab, punch.
You know what? I don't care what anyone else calls it. As far as I'm concerned, I recognise thoroughly that my fans have been with me for 35 years, 40 years. I'm going to be 57 this year. I turned professional as a musician around about 17, 18 years old. So, it's 40 years worth of work, and that's got a level of value. But I also know that the only reason I can have that value is because of the people that have bought the stuff and been part of the whole thing.
Absolutely. And so you've had this career in the industry for so long, and recently you've been shining a lot of light on your time in the industry during the late 80s and 90s, and also how things are today. In some of your great talks, which you've been doing online when you go for a walk, I've really enjoyed them. You make some great points. Is that a good way for you to get things off your chest, or just to get feedback from people?
I think so. I've been through some tumultuous changes in the last few years. I've made a real point of talking about mental health, especially men's mental health. I think, obviously everyone suffers from it to a certain degree. Not just guys, of course, women too. But speaking from my own perspective, as a man in the modern world, I've had to face a lot of mental health issues that I've suffered from through my life, and I've been confronting them. Lockdown threw those into sharp relief, and I had to sort of get some help with that, some therapy, and it's been revolutionary to me. And I've experienced some very, very dark times as well as some really bright times. And I think that's the one thing about the world of the entertainment business, is that your face in the music industry represents one thing, but what's going on behind closed doors is something entirely different. And I think there's a lot of struggle. I think people don't realise the pressures you put yourself under creatively, also what the industry can do to you and the people that are in that industry and the demands that are made of you. Now, I know these are all first world problems, and I'm not for 1 second saying this, oh, poor old me. But the reality is my experiences of this industry have been very much divided between horrendous stuff and really enlightening stuff. And so navigating that's been very difficult. And so I've realised that because I do have a bit of a public position and people, are interested in what I'm doing and what I've got to say, that's a responsibility. And I don't just want to be frivolous about that. I want to talk about things that matter to me, because ultimately, if it matters to me, it probably matters to somebody else. And I think we know we're all the same. We all have the same strains and anxieties in life. And so those walk and talks are a way of me basically getting stuff off my chest, really. I don't have a script. I just turn my phone on and I talk. It's a kind of exercise. It's like a catharsis, really. Because I've got so much experience in this industry, I want to try and share that. And I think the industry's changing at such a rapid rate. Every day something different comes along, and I can't keep up half the time.
Just when you think you're figuring it out, something like AI comes along and curveballs it all.
That's right. I think there's a knee-jerk reaction to something like AI that is essentially propagated by social media. Just like everything on social media is amped up and inflamed, and the reality is something entirely different. And so, I think that these things need to be talked about. And I think, there's a lot of fear-mongering that goes on in our world these days, which is just to do with social media. I mean, social media for me is a platform of conversation. But of course, it's populated by a lot of people who just want to make trouble. And I think the difficulty is how you navigate that. And so part of my process with all this thing is just to sort of talk, just get some real conversations going with real people. Because I think a lot of people must sit behind their computers and be absolutely terrified. And it's easy to see why, isn't it?
Once that algorithm kicks in as well, sometimes some people say, I've got to come off Facebook because I can't stand all this negativity and hate. I'm like, who are you friends with?
I know, exactly. And this is the thing, isn't it? I've realised in life, it's all about choices. You make good or bad choices, and it's down to you. No one's forcing you to turn on Facebook in the morning and sit there for an hour scrolling and getting angry. You can have the choice not to do that. But I did read a very interesting article recently that, the dopamine rushes that we get from looking at social media is very similar to heroin. That's an absolute shocking thing, but I can understand that. It is addictive, isn't it? People think I'm not taking part unless I'm scrolling and I'm shouting at some stranger about politics that neither of us agree on. It just seems to be the way that people deal with stuff, So I think it really is about choices. And I've realized that in my life that I've made some very bad choices and some very good choices. And now I'm trying to make more good choices than bad choices. And I think that's just from experience, really.
When I initially reached out a few months ago about having you back on the podcast, I think you were just about to head into the studio with Wayward Sons. You've got some live dates with later this year. You've been constantly busy, mate. You've done some acoustic shows a month or so ago, but you recently got to guest at Steel Ass Festival, paying tribute to Bernie Marsden with some Whitesnake songs. You've done a lot of similar things like that over your career, obviously being in Fast Way, sharing stages with Fast Eddie Clarke and sang in Dio Disciples. They have to be like really cool moments as a fan of those artists. Do you feel a lot of pressure when you do that, or are you just excited?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've been doing this a long time. It's not my first rodeo, etc. So whenever I get these opportunities to do something, I don't ever feel fearful about physically performing. Because I've been doing it for so long, it's like sitting in a comfy chair. You just know the environment, etc. But what I do feel is it's the inspiration behind it. It's why. It's the why, it's not the how, it's the why. So it's why would I want to do a Bernie Marsden tribute? Well, it's because I loved Whitesnake. Those early records were really important to me as a kid. I used to listen to Ready and Willing and Come and Get It and Love Hunter. They were the soundtrack, a part of my life, So to get that opportunity to celebrate Bernie's life as part of what I would consider to be an important band for me was a no-brainer. And it was absolute joy. And so it's not worry, it's am I going to pull this off? As long as I hope I do a good enough job, that sort of thing. Because I then become a fanboy. I am a fanboy. I mean, you ought to have seen me backstage with Neil Murray. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Neil's playing, and I was like, and I've known Neil for years. We're reasonable friends for a long time. But just to be on that stage and to turn around and see Neil Murray playing the bass line for, Ready and Willing, was just an extraordinary moment of, oh my God, I can't believe I'm here, sort of thing.
Do you have to keep the professionalism in check, though, at that moment?
You do a bit. I mean, it is hard, because I'm singing one of my favourite songs from that band and in front of 5,000 people. And I wasn't in great voice that day because I've been doing a lot of touring and I got a virus in the middle of the tour, the acoustic tour, and it attacked my throat. And I was at the doctor's and he's like, well, there's nothing we can do, it's a virus. And it hadn't cleared. And so I was still at the tail end of it. So I was thinking, oh God, I hope I don't sound rubbish, So that's where the anxiety lies. I just want to be good at it. It's not an ego thing. I think, oh my God, I just don't want to make a mess of this. I don't want to be the weak link. That's the way I look at it,
I know you're not a what-if person, but had the opportunity arose in the 90s when you're on the shortlist, how would you have approached a Van Halen audition?
Well, like I said, I mean, as the story is quite famous, I was approached, not directly by the band, but I was indirectly approached and I was on a shortlist for that. I would have done it the same way as I've done anything else, mate. I mean, I've always been a glasses half full guy. I think that life is a joy. I think we're lucky to be here. I welcome challenges. I don't generally feel negative about anything. I feel usually very positive. I've got a big imagination. It's a bit of a curse really in lots of ways because I never stop thinking about stuff. And so the idea that I could have gone and done an audition with Van Halen wouldn't have worried me in terms of, like I say, the how. It's like the why. Well, the why would have been because they were one of my favorite bands. And I think I know what I'm like. I can always raise my game. And that's to do with the energy of being creative. I don't look at it as a worry. I would have gone in there and just like done my absolute best to pull it off, and I would have had no regrets about that. That's the same thing when I did the Dio's Disciples thing. Absolute privilege. Ronnie, one of my favorite singers of all time, arguably one of the greatest, probably the greatest hard rock singer of all time, probably one of the greatest singers of all time, in my opinion. But I went in there with his band and sang those songs in an earnest, passionate way, in the way that I used to listen to that music. So I think it's about transferring your passion and your inspired belief in something into the actuality of doing something. That's what you've got to do. That is creativity. It's taking your inspirations, taking your passion for it, and actually doing something about it. Because we can all sit around thinking about things, but thinking isn't doing. And so it's about transferring it into a doing.
If you're in charge of picking songs, what would you have gone for? Would you have gone Dave or Sammy with Van Halen?
Oh, Dave.
Really? See, that surprises me a bit.
No.
As in for your vocal style, because Dave's Dave, so you'd have to do all the Dave-isms.
Dave is Dave, and no one can sing it like Dave, and I get sick to death of people slagging his voice off. He's a uniquely individual performer, and that's what makes him great. That's what made him great. And those early records, those first 6 albums up until 1984 are peerless, in my opinion. There is hardly a bad track on it. I mean, I even like Diver Down, which is a lot of people go, oh my God, I can't believe you're saying that.
Diver Down is great, man.
Great record. They didn't put a foot wrong. They are the quintessential American hard rock band. No one can touch them, as far as I'm concerned, in the Dave Lee Roth era.
I'll ask you though, have you had a chance to check out much footage from the current Sammy Hagar tour in the US?
Well, I have seen bits and pieces floating around. I haven't actively sought it out. I mean, listen, I'm a big fan of Sammy Hagar. Montrose, great band, I love all that era. And of course, Van Halen were massively inspired by Montrose, and they were over the moon when he wanted to join and all the rest of it. And, I get all that. And I think Sammy is an extraordinary individual. I mean, to be, what is he, late 70s now?
Something like that.
Yeah, and towards his 80th birthday or something. And he's still got the hair. He still looks relatively fit for his age. And he's still singing those tunes. I mean, all right, he might not have the voice that he had, but why would he have? He's an old dude. I mean, it's amazing. The very fact he can even stand on a stage and pull it off is something else.
Mike still looks the same as he did in about 1988 as well.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, they're amazing. I mean, that's what keeps you young. Being artistic is what keeps you young.
Yeah, I think Sammy and Mike cracked the code a while ago. It's like, let's just enjoy ourselves.
Absolutely. Listen, it's the biggest mistake that musicians make. And I did it myself when I was young. You spend more time agonizing about whether you're doing things right, more time getting into anxious situations about whether you're good enough, rather than just waking up and smelling the coffee and thinking, you know what? I'm lucky to be here. Let's just have some fun. And the reality is that's the code. Unlock that, and then you can have some fun. If you don't have fun as a creative person, what are you doing it for? It's a simple scenario for me, really.
So during this incredibly varied career of yours, you did venture into the movie industry around the late 90s and into the 2000s. You often share your love of film online, and when we last spoke, you told me about seeing the early Spielberg film Duel on a black and white TV, going to see Star Wars at the Odeon in Scarborough and being particularly blown away by the Close Encounters trailer. Do you think younger generations will share that excitement for film? I mean, you're a dad, so have you seen that at all, or are we just movie nerds?
Funny you should say that, because like my youngest daughter, she's 20, what is she now? She's 22. Well, going to be 22 this year. And she's a movie nerd like me. I brought my kids up in the same household, My other 2 daughters, they love movies, but they're not quite as enamored. But my youngest daughter is absolutely fixated on films. And she got excited about Longlegs. She was following all the social media stuff. Oh my dad, you got to see the clips. It's going to be amazing. We've got to go and see it together. As it turns out, we didn't go and see it together, but she was absolutely couldn't wait to go. And she's a cinema goer. She wants to go to the cinema. So that's encouraging because, she's of the generation where she's been brought up on social media. So her world is social media, just like most kids, So that was very encouraging. So she got as exciting about it. I mean, she sent me a text as she was about to go in the cinema to see Longlegs. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm seeing it. It's all this. So that was really encouraging. Actually, I think if the cynic in me would say, oh my God, the golden era of filmmaking's gone. Well, I don't think that's true, actually. I think it's just moved and it's doing something different. But certainly, if you get a great idea, if you can inspire people to see it, I think that the effect is exactly the same.
Do you still enjoy going to the cinema today, or do you have a different view of it? I still enjoy the experience. There's still that little ping every time I walk into a cinema foyer. But I don't know, perhaps being a bit older, prices are crazy. And a lot of time the film is a bit disappointing.
I mean, I think it depends on how you look at it. I mean, I could spend all day long in the cinema, sat in the same seat, watching back-to-back movies if there were films I wanted to watch. Without a doubt, the atmosphere, being in the dark, being on your own. More often than not, I go to the cinema on my own. My wife, she isn't particularly interested in films, so I often go on my own. I'll go with my cousin, who's a real big cinephile like me, so we go together. But if he isn't available, I sit there on my own, right in the middle of all the seats, biggest screen I can find, watching, and it still gives me the same buzz, without a shadow of a doubt. But I do think that one of the big problems with filmmaking these days, in a way, is it's a bit similar to the music industry. There's too much content. I think the quality control has gone down. The demands for content is incredible, as we know through the streaming sites. It's ridiculous the amount of stuff that they need, and we can't keep up. One thing that's been interesting to me has been how the quality of television has gone very, very high. We've got some incredible filmmaking in TV, specifically on Netflix, and all the series, and the BBC have come out with some great stuff recently. Amazon's doing some great stuff. I think that's really risen, and that's really the test bed for a lot of young filmmakers are getting snapped up by Hollywood to make these TV series test beds before they make a movie. It's not so much about making movies anymore, it's more about TV series. But I do think the quality of filmmaking technically has gone up, but the actual narratives have gone down. I don't see the new Indiana Jones series. I don't see a new Steven Spielberg emerging particularly. Where are those young people that are making those kinds of films that are story-driven, that aren't affected by modernity, that are constantly trying to sort of like sidestep the issues of the moral issues that are in society today, because we need to be challenged. We need these things to be talked about. Now, of course, you could look at something like Longlegs, which is a good example, a really modern take on the horror genre, very clever, divides opinion. I'm glad it does. It shouldn't be everyone should like it. We want to be talking about it. Why did that happen? Why did Nicolas Cage perform like that? So I do think there are some green shoots, but it certainly isn't the way that it used to be. And why would it be? The world has moved on. We're no longer in the 80s, 90s blockbuster era where there wasn't Netflix, there wasn't those distractions, where everyone did line up around the block. Mm-hmm. But I do think the missing link and the elephant in the room is the writing ain't that great anymore. I don't see truly original ideas or a reinvention. I often say this about hard rock, or any form of music really, is that what it's about is your version of old ideas. You can't reinvent the wheel. There are only 7 stories, they say. So it's your version, your inspired version of a new way of doing old things. That's what Lucas and Spielberg did with Indiana Jones, as an example. Boys' own TV films, B-roll movies, making it onto a wider palette, digging into those concepts of his inspiration from being a young kid watching Saturday morning TVs, whatever. So it's reinventing those things in an inspired fashion. And currently, I'm not really seeing that. I think it will happen again, but there's a lot of things to maneuver in. I mean, filmmaking's difficult. I mean, I own a film company. We're developing scripts, developing films at the moment. Believe me, it's incredibly difficult. There are so many moving parts, so much criteria to adhere to, and it's very difficult to get something off the ground because there are a lot of anxieties about what people are making.
You mentioned Longlegs. My nephew, he's 18 years old, I think, and he wanted to go and see a film. I saw The TV Glow. I don't know if you've heard of that one. I thought, I'm going to go in cold. Then when we get there, he says, it's by a film company called A24.
I love A24.
I thought, I'm in. I'm in already.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. They're a great example of a film production company house that have gone, we're going to do that our way. We're going to build an audience based on what we know about our own passion, because that's clearly where it comes from. They built that company off the back of the things they love and they want to see. And I think that's what you've got to do with music, with any art, with a book, whatever you're writing, whatever. You've got to do something that you want to do, that you yourself would enjoy. The biggest mistake people make in the creative world is second-guessing the audience, trying to figure out what they might want. Forget that. Absolutely forget it's an absolute hide into nowhere. Do what makes you happy. You should not even think about the audience. It's got to be what makes me happy, because if it makes me happy, maybe it'll make someone else happy.
Yeah, and plus you can sell it with passion when it comes to being completed. Yeah. Most of the big blockbusters did and still do come from the US. As a kid, was you obsessed with everything American like a lot of us were back then? Did it seem like a world away from where you were growing up?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that was the true nature of the American business at the time, is that they bestrode the globe like a colossus, didn't they? There was very few films coming out of the UK that could equal anything like that. But of course, a lot of those movies were being made in the UK, which is kind of interesting, But, that to me was a bit of a golden era, but I don't think it's the only golden era. There will be other times. But yes, I think we were influenced socially by America. I mean, I grew up on Starsky and Hutch, Taxi, Cheers, all these amazing TV shows, the Spider-Man cartoons and Saturday morning TV shows, which were by and large predominantly American. And so you'd be hard pressed not to be affected by it. And I think we looked upon it as a kind of like golden glow on the horizon horizon that somehow was untouchable. We didn't know what it was, but we sort of felt like our humdrum lives were being bettered by and being improved by watching this stuff. And I think that was the kind of magic of it. And in a weird way, all of that wonderful mystery about those things has been now completely removed because now we know everything all the time, every single second of the day. And I do mourn that because I don't think it's improved things. I think actually we've taken a step backwards.
When was your first time over in the States? Was it with Little Angels or had you been over before?
No, the first time I went to New York to do some press and promo to do with the Yngwie Malmsteen tour. Well, in fact, we all went. We were going to go and tour with Yngwie Malmsteen. So we went over, and the first, that flight coming into JFK and seeing the skyline of New York through the window of the plane. I'd only been on an airplane. That was the second time I'd ever been on an airplane for a start. So that was quite shocking and quite mesmerizing. And New York was everything I wanted and more. So the American dream was fully intact and amped up when I got to America the first time.
I mean, that's the perfect place to fly into for your first trip to America, into New York in, I guess, what would it be, 88, something like that?
Yeah, 88, May of 1988, yeah.
Wow, love it. When video came along at the beginning of the 80s, it was yourself, I believe, who brought your family's first VCR, a Betamax, and you'd rent tapes from Jerry Bull's video van.
That's right.
I was thinking you should do a Toby Jepson, Jerry Bull's video van t-shirt. That'd be like a last exit to nowhere kind of niche little thing. That'd be wicked. Was that the only place, or did you have a local video shop as well?
Well, the Jerry Bull thing was because we lived in a village and they had a mobile video van, and it was like a mobile video library. And of course, video was hugely popular. And, even back then, back in the sort of that period, I suppose it would have been, 82, 83 when we first started getting videos. People didn't travel around as much. People weren't in the cars constantly. It just wasn't the same. And so, him traveling in the van and bringing the videos was a booner. But when we moved into Scarborough as a family, there was 2 video stores in Scarborough that I used to use. There was Blockbuster Video, which came along a lot later on. Obviously we know that. But there was another video store which Jerry worked for. I forget what it was called now.
Was it a bit of a sideline business then, the video van?
Well, no, the video van was part of the shop.
Okay.
He worked for a very famous character in Scarborough called Paul Murray, and Paul Murray was a local promoter who owned lots of one of these kind of like entrepreneurs. He always used to walk around in like a sheepskin coat and a cap, and it was all a bit wide, But he had cafes, and he ran 2 or 3 nightclubs, and he also had a video shop business. And we used to go there. I forget what it was called now. I really wish I could remember it. It was the biggest video store in town, and the great thing about it was he used to get a lot of movies that other people wouldn't. A lot of small independent films, and so I used to go there predominantly because I could go and find unusual stuff.
If you're in charge of picking a film, did your family watch, or would they be like, what rubbish has Toby brought back this time?
My dad still is a big film fan. My mum and my dad were both movie fans. I can remember, Sunday nights in our house when I was going, when I was at secondary school or even early when I was at junior school. There used to be quite commonly on TV in those days, I don't know if you remember this, but back in that era, certainly when I was a kid, Sunday nights were a movie night on TV. So on the BBC, round about 9-10 o'clock after the news, there used to be a movie. And that was very, very common. It used to happen quite a lot, whether it was BBC Two or BBC One. And so I saw French Connection for the first time on TV on a Sunday night. I remember seeing Good, the Bad and the Ugly, 12 Angry Men, those sorts of movies, because they were staple classics. The Shining, things like this, and they were always late night movies, and my mum and dad always used to let me watch them, so it was brilliant. So they were fans, but as the 80s rolled on and the blockbuster era came into being, my mum and dad, naturally because of their generation, they weren't that interested. And so I used to watch a lot of those movies entirely on my own because none of the rest of my family were particularly interested. So it was great for me.
Love it. Did your love of film continue whilst you were in Little Angels from the late 80s? I mean, being a band around that time, you'd have been incredibly busy. So could you keep track of movie releases? The only reason I ask is like in the late 80s, for me at least, there was like this massive boom period for blockbuster films. So did you have much downtime? Did you have like a video player on the bus or?
I used to plan the tour so I could go to the cinema. So, yeah, I used to get Empire magazine. I bought every copy of Empire magazine from the first issue when that started. I think that was mid-80s sometime. And so I used to get Empire every month and sort of plan what movies were coming out and keep an eye on what was going on at the cinema. So whenever we had a day off in any town, I would go to the cinema. The reason why that was because it serviced my love of the film industry, but also the key thing really is it kept me quiet. Because if I was touring and I used to suffer from, like any other singer, from tired voice. And so I sat in the cinema, I wasn't talking to anyone, I was just watching the movie.
That's like some forward thinking right there.
You had to gotta get your plan together, you know. But no, the blockbuster movie era was massive for me, and you know, like it was for so many of us, and still has an enormous effect on me. And it's very important, that era, for a number of reasons. But I kept very much in contact. I mean, I went to a midnight screening of The Exorcist when it was deregulated, you know. So I drove from Brighton into the middle of London with a friend to watch a midnight showing for the first time ever in the UK. Packed cinema in the middle of Leicester Square. I went to see the director's cut with the backwards spider walking down the stairs and all that stuff. You know, that I saw that at the cinema, and it was heaving. It was midnight, you know, packed full of people, big movie fans and, you know, horror fans, and that was a buzz, you know. So I used to look for things like that.
You've mentioned previously, I think, that if music hadn't come along, then film would have been something you'd have liked to have pursued at that point. Was there anything like that encouraged at school, or could you maybe just see yourself just writing scripts and trying to make short films? What vision did you have in your mid-teens for that?
I was making home movies on a little Super 8 camera that my dad had, and he gave it to me, and I made a number of small little short films as a kid, as literally 10, 11 years old, which you know, was just me. And I used to do in-camera editing, all that sort of stuff, lots of books about it and stuff. And I was heading into the film industry before the music thing took over. But you know what? Never say never. And I own a film company now. You know, like I say, we're developing scripts. I've written now 7 feature films, 3 of which are in some form of production at the moment. 1 for an Australian company, 2 for our own company. I'm developing scripts with 3 other filmmakers. So, you know, I'm in my 50s and I'm starting to make films. My directional debut, I'm hoping, will happen next year. We're just looking at the funding for that. That will be a very low, ultra low budget movie. Never say never. You know, as far as I'm concerned, just because I'm in my 50s doesn't mean to say my life's over. I'm starting a different chapter, a fresh chapter. And actually, weirdly, I feel I'm far more equipped to deal with that now because I've got a lot of life experience. My writing's a lot better. I've been developing myself as a scriptwriter. I mean, I can actually call myself a professional scriptwriter now because I'm now writing an action drama film for an Australian company that is getting made next year. And they're paying me for that. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm a professional screenwriter.
Mate, that's super exciting. I love that. Can you tell us a little how it was for you beginning to work in the film industry? Did that change your perception of how you watch a film, or is it the same as being a musician? You can switch. Whilst you know how something is done or recorded, you can still enjoy it as a fan.
Exactly that. I mean, the first time I ever went on a real film set was Gladiator. And even though I'd kind of dabbled and when you're in a rock and roll band, especially back in the days Little Angels were in a rock and roll band, making music videos was like making a movie. I mean, it literally was. It cost tens of thousands of pounds, which would equate to hundreds of thousands of pounds now. We made a movie in Hollywood. You know, we went and shot a film with a guy that had made The Entity.
Oh, I remember The Entity, yeah. Saucy video cover on The Entity.
That's it. And the guy that directed that directed the Kicking Up Dust video for Little Angels. And so we went to Hollywood and shot it with a 40 film crew. That all crew members on downtime from major movies. And remember, one of the key grips had worked on Alien, you know, etc., etc. So we did experience the film industry at that stage. And I got to understand how it worked. And we worked with Nigel Dick, who's an incredible filmmaker. And he made all the Guns N' Roses videos.
Talk about mini movies with them.
Exactly. So we went on his film sets and it was like making a movie. But the first proper film I ever really went on was Gladiator, and that was like an incredible experience. And I sort of worked for nearly 3 years in the film industry as an extra, as a stand-in, as we discussed before. And so it gave me a real good grounding, and I got to understand what it was about. But I absolutely do separate them. I don't go into the cinema or watch a movie now and automatically go, no, they shot that wrong, or I wouldn't have done it like that, or that lighting's terrible. None of that. I just watch it as a document. I can completely remove myself from any technical needs. I don't look at the writing. It will affect me because if a film's badly written, I'll probably think, well, that was badly written. But what I'm looking for is it's the same as listening to an album. I'm not interested in the technicalities. What does it make me feel like? How am I going to react to this? What am I going to do when I walk out of this cinema or walk out of this room? I mean, I'm in a room now and I've got a projector cinema setup. I've got a 12-foot screen and 5.1. I've got everything, you know, so I can sit in my room here and watch a movie and it feels like I'm at the cinema. So for me, it's an absolute adoration of the art form. It's the greatest art form of the modern world, certainly of the 20th century. And hopefully it will continue to evolve in the 21st century and remain as relevant, you know.
Gladiator, Ridley Scott, was you a big fan of, well, I'm sure you was a big fan of Alien.
Oh, massive. I mean, you know, Ridley Scott's my favourite film director, him and Spielberg really, and Kubrick, you know, those 3 guys are the top of my tree for me. I've got lots of favourites, but those 3 really make up my love, if you like. And so meeting Ridley, I mean, was an extraordinary experience. I met him, worked with him quite closely on a couple of moments for the film, just because I happened to live very close to the film set. So I used to get the call, can he come in, you know? And he's a lovely guy and a genius, as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, really inspiring. And the great thing about meeting Ridley Scott was, He was from the northeast of England, and I got called in very early on the Gladiator movie. I've been working on the film for about 3 weeks, and like I say, I lived very close to the film set near the Bourne Wood, which is in Farnham. The second assistant I got very friendly with, and he said, "Look, if we need you, can we call upon you? Because if we need an exit." I said, "Yeah, of course, you know." So me and my friend Howard, we lived within about a mile of the set. We got a call one morning. "Can you come in right now?" We got a call at about 4 a.m. Can you come in? Went into hair and makeup, and there was 6 of us, and we did this lineup with some Roman soldiers, and it was literally us and Ridley Scott and these 6 guys dressed up as Roman legionaries. And Ridley was stood literally 2 feet from me, and Howard asked me a question, and I gave my friend Howard this answer, and Ridley went, "Are you from the northeast of England?" And I went, "Yeah, I am actually. I'm from Scarborough." And he went, "I love Scarborough." He says, "As a kid, I used to go down there, you know, because he was, of course, he was born in Redcar or lived in and around Redcar. He said, we used to go down to Scarborough for the weekends and have ice cream on the seafront. Is Giaconelli still? He's like started talking about Scarborough. So I'm like, I can't believe it. I can't believe I'm actually here. You know, A, I can't believe I'm here talking to Ridley Scott, and B, that he knows anything about where I live. And he was lovely, and he was a really cool bloke. And in that instant, I realised he's exactly the same as me. He's just doing his passion. He's following his dreams. He's got heart and soul up the yazoo. He knows exactly what he wants, but he's a decent person, and he was a nice guy, and he was quite happy, one of the biggest filmmakers in the world, to talk to a lowly idiot like me on a film set and in the golden hour in the morning, you know. And I just thought that was wonderful, and it was really inspiring, that actually. I thought, you know what? That personifies what you need to be in the arts world. You've got to be a decent person and just have passion and a vision.
And how long's that stuck with you?
All of my life. And, you know, that was, 1997?
So like 25 plus years. That's the impression that made.
Exactly.
So is Alien Romulus on your list to see when it's out?
Oh, without a doubt. Although I'm sort of just like we all are. You're wondering, aren't you? Oh, my God, is it going to be rubbish? You know. But, you know, I mean, you know, I think he's a decent filmmaker. And I wasn't really particularly enamoured with the remake of, oh, God, I've gone straight out of me, bloody, Evil Dead. He made the Evil Dead remake, didn't he?
Oh, I like that one.
For me, nothing beats the original Sam Raimi movies. And I think especially Evil Dead 2 is just one of the funniest.
I was watching that yesterday. It's just batshit crazy.
I love that film. And I think, you know, Sam Raimi for me was one of those filmmakers that just kind of really inspired me. So I suppose I look at it from a slightly different perspective. I didn't particularly enjoy that myself. But I hope, from what I can gather, I mean, you know, Ridley's signed it off and said, it's great, you've made a great movie. So I hope so. You know, I'm planning to go day of release, so we'll see.
You also worked on the huge Band of Brothers TV show, met Steven Spielberg, worked on Sleepy Hollow, stand-in for Christopher Lambert in Highlander Endgame. But is there any particular film series you would have liked to have been a small part of? Or did you ever hear of any shoots where you just missed out on, shit, missed on that one?
Oh, goodness me. Where would I start on that? I don't know, man. I mean, because I'm such a huge fan of the Indiana Jones movies, that would have been something to take part in. And weirdly, some of the guys that worked on the Band of Brothers series worked on Indiana Jones movies because they all came from that stable of British technicians, you know. So I had lots of conversations with people about that. Sadly, one of the guys I got very, very friendly with, Martin, he worked as the clapper loader on Last Crusade. And the stories that he told me about working with Spielberg, it just sounds like an absolute dream. He's the greatest guy to work with. He's incredibly inclusive, you know, always treats his crews really, really, really well. It was Martin that introduced me to Steven Spielberg. So, yeah, I mean, I think probably Indiana Jones movies for a lot of nostalgic reasons, actually.
So I want you to time travel a little to Friday night in the 80s or early 90s. If it's the 80s, you're waiting for Jerry Bull's video van to pull up, or later perhaps you're on the road with Little Angels. What movie soundtrack do you have on your Walkman, and what 3 tapes are you going to rent for the weekend?
Right. Well, I mean, the movie soundtrack's a tough one because there's so many of them that are great, and I've got quite a few. I know it sounds really, really boring, but I would go for the Star Wars soundtrack. I think the John Williams, that score is not just one of the greatest movie soundtracks. I think it's one of the greatest pieces of modern classical music. It is beyond awesome, you know, and I think as a musician, I listen to that and the depth of vision, the layered nature of it, the complexity, the glorious nature of it, so sophisticated. It went above and beyond. And mainly because it was the first time, wasn't it? That kind of score was applied to a film of that type. They never married the two things together. So to get the grandiose nature of that film and bring this kind of huge opera-style film to the screen, it needed that score. Without that score, I don't think that film would have been half as good.
John Williams made 80s kids like us appreciate classical music more than we perhaps should have done.
Without a doubt. And, you know, and I still lean on that. I still think about that. But, you know, of course, he wrote so many great soundtracks.
I mean, he even almost reinvented things again when The Phantom Menace came out with that Duel of the Fates music.
Exactly. And, you know, the guy, again, what is he in his 90s now? Still composing, still just as excited as he ever was about doing stuff. And that's the point, isn't it? You know. So in terms of the movies, I mean, I'm going to have to slightly straddle 80s and into the 90s. Very difficult. And I am, like I say, I'm a real populist. So I'm going to go initially. I can't help myself. It's going to have to be Raiders of the Lost Ark. I know it's people go, oh, boring, that's boring. But that is fundamentally 1981, one of the most important movies I think ever made. It encouraged so much positivity in the world, and that's when a movie can change the world. I think without a doubt, Raiders is one of those movies that, love it or hate it, be bored of it all you want, but it changed the world. It brought some positivity to the planet, and I think that is a really important movie.
Where'd you see it at? Was that the Odeon in Scarborough?
I saw Indiana Jones at, I think it probably would have been, it's most likely it would have been. And that, the whole opening scene, and of course the Odeon in Scarborough, it was the second biggest theatre outside of London. It was built by the same people who built the Hammersmith Odeon. So the screen was enormous. I mean, it was enormous. It held something like 3,500 or 4,000 people.
Did it have a curtain as well?
Oh, God.
Massive fuck-off curtain.
Oh, huge. And it was literally, I remember I was sat, same thing with the Star Wars thing, when the Star Destroyer comes over at the beginning of the movie and all that, and the sound in that cinema, it was shaking the walls, That's the experience I want out of cinema, and that's what it gave me. I mean, I'll never forget that feeling of the seat shaking as that rumble happened, So whatever archaic sound system they had in that cinema was flipping amazing, So that's that. So next up, can't help myself again, it's going to have to be Blade Runner. Staggering, very, very important movie. And of course, was the sort of one of the big Kickstarters for Ridley Scott. That and Alien, of course. Brilliant, brilliant film.
Can I shock you?
Oh, you don't say you don't like it?
Never seen it.
Oh my God, mate, you've got to check it out.
For the same reason you showed that Raiders one prior. Harrison Ford is only Han Solo and Indiana Jones. As a kid, I was like, no, that's not right.
Oh, mate.
So I never got to see it.
Do yourself a favour, get the Blu-ray final cut and dig in. Get yourself a bag of flipping crisps and a big Coke and just watch it. It's a very, very important film. And I think what I love about that movie is you can see Ridley forming his plan. Even though it's not perfect, there are obviously things that are going, it's a bit slow and it's a bit cumbersome in places. The reality is it's a beautifully composed film, beautifully rendered on, physically rendered. And you can see how he's working himself out. Between that and Alien, you've really got the sort of toolbox for how his films are going to evolve and how he was going to affect filmmaking going forward. So that's important. Now, the last movie on my list, very hard to choose between the two of them, but I'm going to plump for Aliens, I think. James Cameron, I love Aliens, the original. It's the haunted house in space. I love it. Personally, I prefer Alien, but I do love Aliens.
That's had to do a sequel right there.
Absolutely unbelievable. And it's James Cameron at his best. It really is. He's now become a bloated filmmaker that I find nowhere near as interesting. But I do think probably one of the greatest moments of science fiction filmmaking ever made in a populist sense. What I love about it, the writing is exquisite. It's a beautifully written piece. It doesn't pull its punches, and yet it was a commercially hugely successful movie. That's how to make adult filmmaking for the masses.
Toby, I'll let you go, but thank you for chatting with me, mate.
No, it's been brilliant. Thanks. At any time, talk about films, I'm there.
I'm excited to see what's next in your journey, both music and film, because you've whet our appetite with all the script talk and project talk.
As soon as I've got some real solid, information and we're moving forward to the next stage and then we've got something we can talk about again, then I'll let you know and we can maybe do it again.
Massive thank you to Toby Jepson for chatting with me on today's Straight to Video podcast. He's certainly one of the easiest and most fun people to interview, and to hear him talk with so much energy and passion about both music and film is a real blast. Check out TobyJepsonOfficial.com for all his current projects, and look out for him on the road later this year with Wayward Sons. So next week is episode 300 of the show, pretty much 4 years to get here, and that chat is already in the bag, and I can't wait for you to hear it. It's the perfect crossover with 80s movie nostalgia and a bucket load of music talk too, which might surprise you, so please check back next Friday for that landmark show and celebrate with me. But until then, please make sure to always be kind, please rewind and unwind, and I'll speak to you all real soon.